Welcome everyone to the January 2020 already. My HR Best Practices, My HR Geniuses, HR Best Practices webinar series. This is our 2020. We're gonna look forward to 2020, and we are going to do some prognostication on what we can expect in like the HR and risk worlds. We are not going to be able to cover everything. Especially in an election year, there's just going to be a ton of stuff. Some that's going to surprise us a little bit, but for the most part, I think we have a pretty good idea of what the issues are du jour, and that are going to be coming forward in 2020. At least the foreseeable ones, I guess we have an idea, and we'll talk about those. And we're going to review 2019. A lot of what occurred in 2019 is going to bleed over into 2020, and we've already seen a bunch of stuff in the first week or two, a couple weeks here of the new year. So we're going to talk about that. This is me. I'm Kevin. If you don't know me, now you know me. I'm a labor and employment certified labor and employment law specialist by the MSBA, and I'm a partner at Thompson Co. Cousins and Irons up in the Minnesota office, and I am basically an HR attorney, and that's what I do. We have Thompson Co. offers a monthly subscription-based legal program, so that at the $79 level you can call our legal HR hotline with any questions that you might have. There's no volume limits on this or anything like that, so you can actually call attorneys and not have to worry about legal fees on your day-to-day questions. We have enhanced programs. You're welcome to try this. This is a month-to-month. All these are month-to-month programs. Try it. See if you like it. But if you like the idea of getting legal advice on HR matters and not having to worry about legal fees beyond just this monthly membership program, this might be something worth looking into for you. Definitely a cost saver for most businesses, and so you're welcome to join and just reach out to us or go onto our website at myhrgenius.co if you are interested. And these are the services we offer. The newest service that we implemented in 2019 were our podcasts. So hopefully if you haven't listened to some of the podcasts, and if you really, really enjoy listening to my voice and want to hear more of my voice, because who doesn't, then the podcast might be something. We just posted one a couple weeks ago, like right around Christmas. That was a pretty cool conversation regarding just like intergenerational conflict and issues and some ideas on scheduling and all that. So the podcasts are pretty fun. They're a conversation. We're going to be doing a lot more podcasts in 2020. 2019, we're starting to get our feet under us on the podcasting, and it was a lot of fun. It was a really good time, and I think we're going to have a lot more informative podcasts in 2020. And they're like a Q&A type of format, so it's not just me that you get to listen to on the podcast. They're only like 10 to 15 minutes long, although one was like 20 minutes long because it was so informative. But for the most part, they're pretty short. Today we are going to talk about, and also, by the way, if you didn't check that you need your HRCI or SHRM credits or the other credits that we're offering, like CLE credits for this, if you didn't check that, just make sure to reach out to us, and we'll send you the certification once we confirm your attendance. If you do have any questions, you're welcome to type them in the question box. I don't always get to all the questions on these webinars, but I normally follow up if we didn't cover the question later in the program. And so we'll normally follow up and engage you and answer the questions that you have. So you're welcome to write and send those along the way. Okay, well, Happy New Year and welcome everybody for 2020. So we're going to talk about a lot of the changes. The Department of Labor has been particularly active in the last few months beyond just this whole new salary level overtime rollout. So we're going to talk about a number of Department of Labor initiatives that have been going on. We are going to talk about PTO. The states continue to implement PTO. We'll talk about minimum wage. We're going to talk about a bunch of HR labor labor laws and regulations and that sort of thing. So let's talk about generally overtime and PTO. And we'll start with the most obvious one, which is the new overtime regulations. Obviously, for those of you that have looked into this, it's not nearly as complicated. I don't know why some people are making this sound like super complicated, this whole new salary level test. These regulations were a big, Matt, like not that big of a deal. Did it impact some businesses, particularly if you have assistant managers that you're claiming are exempt, especially outside of metropolitan areas? Yeah, that might be the case. But for the most part, so what do the new regulations do? Well, the biggest change from the regulations is that it rose the salary level from $455 a week to $684 a week. So if you have a white-collar exempt employee, so a professional exempt, administrative exempt, or executive exempt, not outside sales, because outside sales you don't have to pay a salary to those people. You can pay them straight commission. But if you had an executive, an administrative, or a professional level employee, and you're paying them less than, as of January 1 this year, 2020, if you're paying them less than $684 a week, then if you want to continue to maintain that exemption, you need to bump them up to $684 from $455. So as a percentage basis, yeah, okay. I mean, you went from $455 to $684, but the last time that was changed was 2004 or something like that. There's been a little bit of inflation since. I think most people most companies that I talked to, this proposal raising the salary level to $35,000 and a little north of $35,000 a year for an annual salary to an exempt employee that's probably in management or admin or professional level for sure. Most people were making more than that $35,000 and change, more than $684 a week. So it really didn't have a lot of impact. Obviously, there might be some employees, outliers here and there that you had to either consider. And if you haven't looked at this, what you'd need to do is, if you haven't looked at it, you need to go through your wage report and make sure that all of your exempt employees are making at least $684 per week on a salary basis. The highly compensated employee, again, it went from 100 to 107 and change. Not a big move. Most people who are trying to, this HCE, these highly compensated employees, most employers were paying more than $107,000 to begin with, and most highly compensated employees normally meet the duties test, the full duties test anyway, under the regulations for either an exempt, executive, administrative, or professional level employee. The only kind of interesting thing with the new regulations is, and this is a holdover from the regulations that were proposed by the Obama administration, is to allow some non-discretionary bonuses that can be paid out. So up to 10% of the salary can be allocated from non-discretionary bonuses or incentive pay and commissions. So you don't have to pay the $684 every week. You could pay up to 10% of the person's compensation through these other means like commissions, bonuses, that sort of thing. Again, non-discretionary, not discretionary bonuses. It has to be non-discretionary or incentive pay commissions. So that's something that allows a little bit of flexibility in paying your exempt people. So there's that. Again, not as big of a deal as it was a lot bigger deal when the Obama administration had proposed it, and the salary level was going to go up to $49,000, somewhere around $49,000. That was a big deal. But what would have been a really, really big deal is if they had changed the duties test so that we could actually understand what an administrative exempt person is without having to pour through dozens and dozens of court cases to understand. That would have been maybe helpful from the Department of Labor, but that didn't happen. So I don't know, maybe someday in the future we will all be able to avoid litigation and actually get some decent regulations from the Department of Labor on this issue. Paid time off. We are going to have in 2020, we've got a really good slate of webinars planned. We are going to have an entire webinar on paid time off, basically state-level issues with paid time off, since there is no federal paid time off. Although federal employees now get paid time off, so I don't know, maybe because federal employees get it, maybe now, Congress will think about mandating for the private sector, though I doubt it. A number of states obviously have implemented paid time off systems, frameworks, laws. A lot of cities have implemented ordinances with paid time off, so there's definitely, paid time off is definitely covering a huge number of employees, huge percentage of the workforce in the United States where there's mandatory paid time off. But we don't have it at the federal level except for federal employees. So, and that's new for them. So congratulations to them. They get mandatory paid time off under certain circumstances. So, but for the most part, most employers still have the option of providing some form of paid time, providing paid time off and setting the circumstances for use and accrual and whether it's being paid out and that sort of thing. There are a number of states, so there's two types of systems that we have working here. We have the PFL, the paid family leave, paid sick and safety leave, so paid family. We've got that sort of framework where we have sick and safe leave, and a lot of cities have implemented that, like Chicago's implemented that recently, Minneapolis, St. Paul implemented it, Austin, Dallas implemented these, and obviously there's a lot of places that have implemented it, as well as all these states, Arizona, California, Massachusetts, New Jersey, and so forth, and a lot of cities, like I just mentioned a number of them. And that's with regard to sick and safe. So those laws basically say, and ordinances, if you're in one of those cities, those laws and ordinances, and Houston too, I should say Houston. So Houston doesn't have one. Sorry, it's just Austin, Dallas, and I believe San Antonio and Texas. So sick and safe leave laws say basically if you are, you're going to be able to accumulate, and normally you accumulate at like 1 hour, like right around 1 hour for every 30 hours of quote work, like work. And then you accrue like 1 hour of paid time off to take in the event of your own sickness or the sickness of an immediate family member. Sometimes it extends to in-laws, but spouse, kids, your own self, sometimes in-laws, or for safety. So if you need to help somebody get a restraining order or go to therapy or something like that, you can use this paid time off. It's not to go surfing in LA. People might try to say, hey, I need a mental vacation, like I'm going to take my sick and safe leave. That's not normally going to cut it. Unless they get a doctor's note for that. This is really to give some minimal amount of time to employees so that if they're, for all the time that they work, that they get some amount of paid time off. Again, normally it's like 1 hour for every 30 hours of work, but some states are a little bit, and some cities are a little bit different on that. And then you've got a different system, and some places have both. Like Massachusetts is going to have both next year. It says 2020. That's not exactly true. It's actually 2021 that it starts to get used. But some states have this. So for like if you need it for bonding leave, so you have a baby, you adopt, you need it, or you need it for like a longer term situation, like military leave to address the situation, like if a family member is coming back from the military. And that's more of a paid family leave framework. And a lot of times in these situations, like Massachusetts and New York, for example, it's treated kind of like unemployment comp, where you have some payroll deduction for a period of time. It fills the coffers of a state insurance fund, or you have to purchase insurance, and then you basically get, some fraction or maybe up to an entire amount, depending on the location of of your missed wages back. And again, it has to meet the circumstances, so it's got to be, it's got to meet the circumstances. But a lot of times it's for like bonding leave, like after you have a baby. Or an adoption is kind of the most common one used. So this is something that has continued to go in 2019. States and cities are continuing. Like we saw a bunch of states in Texas, cities in Texas, implement this in 2019. We saw Massachusetts roll out at least the deductions and the notices to employees, and then we're going to start to see it implemented in Massachusetts in the future. So here's a little diving deeper a little bit. We've got some details with Massachusetts. And so Massachusetts is going to have, they have currently the earned sick time law. So like I said, you earn 1 hour for every 30 hours of work. This sort of framework, if there's something that's going to catch on and, become national, like through like a national, like Congress doing something, it just seems like this is the way it's going to go. Like it's going to go some sort of like earning like 1 hour of 30 hours. You earn 1 hour for every 30 hours of work. Massachusetts is going to implement family medical leave in 2020, like I mentioned. Washington implemented one in 2020 as well. And again, you can see the amount and the detail for Washington that Washington's that they passed in 2019 or implementing in 2020. They're allowing 12 weeks paid leave for the employer or a family member with a serious illness, and again, you have to meet the definition of serious illness, but normally it translates with FMLA. So if you serious health condition under the FMLA, probably going to meet the definition of serious illness for Washington, and then 16 weeks for bonding. So Washington's going to give 16 weeks after you have a baby or adopt, and then 18 weeks if there's complications. So if you have like a C-section or some sort of other complications or need prenatal care with a pregnancy, related to a pregnancy, you're going to get up to 18 weeks in Washington. And the max payment's $1,000 per week, and the contribution rate's 4.4% versus Massachusetts, which is a contribution rate of 0.75, though some of that comes from the employee and some of it comes from the employer. New York has had this for a few years where it's more of a mandatory insurance type of program for eligible employees, and employees in New York now get up to 60% of their average weekly wage paid. So if I'm making $1,000 a week, and I go off in New York and I meet the circumstances and I get the time off, I'm going to get $600 a week from this fund, and with a maximum of $840 in 2020. So that's how New York works. But anyway, what I would say is pay attention. Even if you don't have employees in these states, pay attention to them, because these are the sorts of frameworks that we're going to be looking at. It's just going to continue. There are a lot of other states left to pass paid time off laws, and I think there is some bipartisanship, if there exists any bipartisan sentiment at all in Congress anymore. This is one of the issues where there is at least a little bit of crossover between the parties. Minimum wage increases. We've continued to see a lot of minimum wage increases, though most of the minimum wage increases that we saw in 2019 and that we're going to see in 2020, most of those are due to automatic minimum wage structures that have been put in place. So several years ago, and we've been talking about this on webinars for years now, but several years ago when the whole $15 minimum wage thing went into, was all the talk of the town, what a lot of these states and cities did, but we'll just talk about the states, what a lot of the states did was they put in an automatic escalator, and they tied it to CPI, or they tied to some sort of inflation index thing. And so they basically said, hey, yeah, okay, we're going to raise our minimum wage. We're going to raise it to like $8.50 an hour. And then we're going to raise it to $8.75, and then we're going to raise it to $9. But then after that, we are then going to put it on this like automatic inflation adjuster. And often there's still some discretion at the administrative level, the administrative agency level for these states, where they can still come in and say, yeah, we're going to increase it, or no, we're not going to increase it. So Minnesota is a good example of that, where the agency actually has some discretion in whether to raise it or not. And so Minnesota raised theirs on January 1 to $10 an hour based on this indexing, this automatic inflation indexer. That's how Alaska gets to 1019. Right? That's how Florida gets to 856. So we a lot of these states have just automatic increases that are going to be considered. I don't know how many states are left that where it's politically feasible to raise the minimum wage. It doesn't seem to even be part of a conversation at the federal level anymore. I think the federal government has bigger fish to fry these days. So anyway, these states cover a lot of employees in the United States, and obviously we've seen some cities as well try to increase it. But then in those states where it's not politically feasible for this, where they don't want to allow the cities to increase it, then some of those states have gotten into legal issues and put the kibosh on states. Okay, let's talk about some proposed regulations and opinion letters that have been coming out from the Department of Labor. Like I said before, the Department of Labor has been busy. So fluctuating work week. I don't know how many of you have used anything, use or implement, or have ever, even looked into the concept of a fluctuating work week. Let me very quickly describe what a fluctuating work week looks like. A fluctuating work week is where you have a non-exempt employee, and you're going to pay them a flat salary, and their hours are going to fluctuate above and below 40 hours a week. But you come to a written proposal with them, and you say, hey, you know what, you're going to fluctuate all over the place. Sometimes you're going to be working like 30 hours a week. And yeah, we'll pay you for 30 hours a week, but then other weeks you might be working like 55 hours per week. And we just want to have an understanding. So we come to an agreement on a fluctuating work week. Okay, so fluctuating work weeks, not used a lot, but one of the questions was, how, for those employers that do use them, what do we do with bonuses? I mean, because when we get a bonus, we have to recalculate the bonus into the period that the bonus covers, right? So you don't just, if you get a bonus for sales for that quarter, you don't just look at, for a non-exempt employee, you don't just look at their hours for that week that they got the bonus. You have to apply that bonus across the entire quarter. On a prorate, so you just take that bonus and you divide it by 12, right? And by the way, we will have an entire webinar on complicated DOL issues. Aggregating bonuses out is one of the primary topics of it, and we'll talk about that later. But that's how you do it. So you aggregate it out over the period that the bonus covers. So the question is, with a fluctuating work week, how is it going to be addressed? And so they made it clear, you have to aggregate in the bonus amount into the regular rate of pay. So they made it that clear. But the bigger question is, for those employers that say, yeah, we want to pay you just a flat salary, and you're going to agree to it, and we're not going to pay you overtime. But what happens if the person never really does go below 40 hours and just constantly is going 41, 42, 50, 55, 48, and they don't really have a commensurate amount of time under 40. That's the bigger issue. That's where a lot of the litigation is, with employees second-guessing and employers trying to take advantage of the situation. So that's where a lot of the litigation is. We got no real clarity from the Department of Labor on that. Rounding time, again, a real nuance with the Department of Labor, and a lot of employers don't fully appreciate that you can round. Now, a lot of time management systems, employers will set it so that they're paying every minute, right? So you're paying to the employee every minute, so there's no question whatsoever. But the Department of Labor did affirm that if you have a rounding policy where you're rounding to the nearest 5-minute mark, or the nearest 1/10, which is 6-minute mark, or the nearest 15-minute mark, or the nearest 30-minute mark, if you're rounding time, and the time helps and hurts the employees, kind of like the fluctuating work week, the time rounding helps and hurts the employee, close to an equal measure, then the rounding system's fine. And so, just affirming that we can do rounding, we don't have to measure time worked down to the, exact minute for all employees. The Department of Labor confirmed things that we already knew or should have known, that, like I had mentioned before, that when we get bonuses and the bonuses are non-discretionary, that the non-discretionary bonuses need to be aggregated over the period that the bonus covers. And one of the questions was with regard to training time, if you give somebody a bonus for, like, after they complete a training period, like prior to orientation or onboarding, then how does that bonus work? And the answer is, well, you take that bonus and you aggregate it over the 10-week training period. So you calculate it into the regular rate of pay. If any time is worked over 40, you need to pay them additional amounts for those weeks due to the increase or due to the bonus being recalculated into the regular rate of pay. And again, if none of that makes any sense to you, then definitely come in and listen, or call me, but listen to the webinar that we're going to do, primarily covering that sort of topic and other complicated DOL issues. Tip credits. Congress is looking to amend the Fair Labor Standards Act to incorporate in some law that was passed when we had the Trump tax code revisions about 2 years ago. They made some language in there saying that tips basically you can't allocate tips to managers or supervisors in any way. And so the Democrats put that in the last minute in the language. It's been a law ever since, but it makes sense to amend the Fair Labor Standards Act. And so that's where we're going to amend the Fair Labor Standards Act. Likely that's something that's going to happen, since it's already been passed into law anyway. Regular rate of pay, kind of stuff I've already talked about with signing bonuses and all that. Okay, let's talk about a number of the pay equity issues. Pay equity being like one of the top hot topics for HR in 2019, and I think it's going to continue in 2020, but we'll see. I don't know. I'll be curious if it's as hot of a topic in 2020. I suspect no, but we'll see. I think it's going to continue to be an issue, but I think so much is going to occur around the election this year that pay equity, which really gets into discrimination issues and gender discrimination issues. I just wonder if that's not going to We've got our EEO reports. If you have 100 or more employees and you have not done your EEO 1 component 2 data, there's actually still time, because what happened was the judge who forced the EEOC to collect this component 2 data, you can thank a judge for doing that. The judge who forced the EEOC to open it up and collect this component 2 data monitored it, and the EEOC said that they were going to get like around 72% of the employers, the eligible employers, again, employers with 100 or more employees, to do the component 2 data by September when it was due. And hopefully a lot of you did it and you were really diligent. Well, only about 39.7% of the employers actually met that deadline. So if you did, you get the old attaboy from the government thanking you, but the judge said, okay, well, you didn't meet your deadline. So the judge then opened it up for a longer period of time. So we've got an extension till the end of this month. So if you haven't done your component 2 data and you're supposed to, or if you don't know what that means, then definitely reach out to me and we can talk about it. But component 2 data in 2020, probably not going to happen. So the EEOC put forward some amendments to the regulations saying like they don't want to do the component 2 data. Not terribly surprising. If we have a Democratic administration in a year, my webinar a year from now I will say get ready for component 2 data in 2021. But in 2020, under this administration, unless we get legal intervention, I don't see you having to do component 2 data. Don't shoot the messenger if I end up being wrong because of judicial intervention. So caveat right there. Judge might come in and say, you have got to do it to the government. But we'll see. I doubt it. EEO1, you still need to do component 1 data, your typical data that you've been collecting for a number of years. For those of you who are federal contractors or thinking about federal contracts, the OFCCP, for this administration anyway, said that they're not going to consider component 2 data under the discrimination analysis that they do with federal contractors. So you get a pass on that. You don't have to worry about that one so much. Salary history questions. Again, this is all related tangentially to pay equity. One of the ways that, if we're going to solve this problem of pay equity, and I think it is a problem, and I don't think a lot of people disagree that it's, say that pay equity is not a problem in the United States. One of the ways to get at it, which a lot of states and cities, as you can see on this list, have gotten at it, is to say that you can't ask an employee what they were making at their previous jobs, right? And the reason is because the way this reasons out is, well, okay, if they were being underpaid at their previous job, then that sets them up to be underpaid at their future job that they're applying for. And I think that makes a lot of sense because for the most part, employers, some employers have structured pay grids where they're paying within a range and there's no real deviation outside of that. But a lot of employers, it's like, okay, can I pay you as little as possible? And that's what a lot of employers want to do, right? And it makes sense. Welcome to capitalism. So asking about salary history is a way to say, well, I'm not going to tell you what I made, because then you're just going to be like, okay, here's 5% or 10% more, and if I was underpaid by like 25%, well, okay, then I'm still going to be underpaid at the new job. So anyway, I think that's going to help. Prohibitions on salary history questions that a lot of cities and states, a number of cities and states have passed. There has been some movement on changing the way that that the states look at equal pay. California has been the big mover on this in the country. I don't think anybody will be terribly surprised by that. But California, a lot of the arguments that we make just basically by saying, hey, that person and that person, like they don't work, like he and she, they have different jobs. And California is not, that person, one of them works in LA and the other works in San Francisco, or the other works in Salt Lake City. That's not, they're not comparable. They're not comparable. There's a reason the person in LA makes way more than the person in Salt Lake City. Well, those are going to be factors that might be considered, but they're not going to be dispositive on the issue. So we're not going to be, in California, for example, we're not going to be able to argue that apples and oranges so easily. If you have employees in California, you really need to do wage analysis to make sure that you're paying them comparably to, that the females are being paid to comparably to men. Wage theft. This is a big issue, especially up in Minnesota in 2019, but New York also passed a wage lien law that would allow, it hasn't been signed by the governor last I heard, but the New York law would allow the government to put a lien on your business and property if you have been found to owe employees money. I think that's kind of a big deal. Minnesota criminalized it. New Jersey criminalized it in 2019 as well, saying that basically if you're not paying your employees and there's obviously some sort of intent behind that, and you haven't paid them their wages, there could be, you could go to jail. It's whatever the level of crime is, depending on the state. So wage theft is another way to just get people money, and it's not all employers out there. It's a very, very small number of employers that really don't pay employees their wages, but there are enough out there that give employers a bad name, especially like in the construction industry and trades, where you can imagine employees are just not getting paid what they're owed. There's a lot of devious practices. So these wage theft laws, I think, are going to continue it's hard to stand up as a politician and argue that people shouldn't get paid what they're owed. And so I would just expect that wage theft laws are coming to a state near you. I don't think it's that politically divisive of a topic, and I think it is something that a lot of people on both sides of the aisle are going to embrace and sell to their constituencies. So I would not be surprised if next year that list is significantly larger, and before we know it, half the country has some sort of criminalization of wage theft. If you are in Minnesota and don't know anything about wage theft laws, then you definitely need to reach out to me, because there's also like a notice requirement that was mandatory as of July 1 for all new employees, and then that also the notice that goes to all employees who have like changes in terms or conditions of their employment, even if they're current employees. Predictive scheduling, another topic that's been out there. Michigan was one of the first states to really talk about it. New York City implemented a predictive scheduling. If you're unfamiliar with what predictive scheduling is, it is this. You as an employer, under predictive scheduling principles or laws, ordinances, you as an employer need to let your employees know what their schedule is going to be. You need to post it. You need to provide it like electronically or in writing, and you can't deviate from it. Or at least there are restrictions on your ability to deviate from it. So Chicago in 2019, it's going to implement midway through this year, but Chicago for certain covered employers implemented this, and again, New York City has a similar law here. But basically, under the Chicago framework, in the first year or so of the ordinance, you can't change. Like once you post, you have to post the schedule, and then you cannot change it within 10 days of when that person is supposed to work, right? I mean, how terrible is that for the restaurant and hospitality industry generally, or manufacturing? Like, my gosh, I mean, schedules vary and all that. So it's just crazy, and work varies and needs vary. But if you do change it in Chicago with less than 10 days notice, you got to pay the person an hour pay at their regular rate. So not the worst thing in the world. But if you change it with less than 24 hours, so if the person comes into the restaurant and, it's a snowstorm in Chicago, and nobody shows up, if you send them home, so less than 24 hours change, you send them home, they don't work their whole shift, and they miss 6 hours of that shift, you got to pay them time and a half. It's kind of stupid. You might as well just have the employee just sit there and fold napkins or something and pay them less and then waste their time. I don't get it, but in any event, it's not the first thing I don't get in Illinois or Chicago with regard to laws. But that's Chicago. Enjoy. It's not going to cover all employers, fortunately, but it's going to cover enough employers that they'll probably start to look to move outside the city limits. Oregon had passed a similar thing, 7 days advance notice, so a little shorter time frame here, and so we've got something going on in Oregon. Michigan tried this a few years back. It failed at the legislative level. Predictive scheduling is kind of the home run shot for a lot of states and cities. Home run shot being like about as progressive of a change, I think, as you're going to be able to make, especially if it's going to be directly impacting hospitality and cover hospitality. So I think it's a pretty big problem. But anyway, watch out for that. Joint employers, we got some new guidance from the Department of Labor on joint employers, helping, good for employers on this. So what is the Department of Labor going to consider when they look at joint employer tests? They're going to look at the 4 factors. So who has the power to hire and fire, who has the power to supervise, who controls the work and schedule, who determines the rate and method of pay, who maintains the employment records. So those are the 4 factors that they're going to look at. They're not going to look at a lot of the factors that when we talk about whether the person is an independent contractor or a, quote, employee, we look at a number of things about like the ability for the person to make money depending on how they work, that sort of thing. So we didn't, a lot of those factors are not going to be considered in the joint employer. So is there a franchise situation? Is there a legal agreement regarding compliance? Is there a contractual agreement? So if you have a contract with a staffing agency and you tell the staffing agency that they need to do this, that, or the other to meet your quality compliance, or they need to be, their staffing agency employees need to be on E-Verify, or the staffing agency needs to comply with I-9 requirements, all these sorts of things, like you set conditions and stuff on this, then you don't, those aren't going to be factors that the Department of Labor is going to consider. So that's good news for employers, I think. So I think it's definitely good stuff. A little bit on the Me Too, we had some, obviously Me Too has been around now, and we'll have a whole, one of our webinars this year will be on harassment investigations. Harassment investigations, like top to bottom, like how to do them, and all the tips and tactics and that sort of thing. So not a lot of developments directly on the Me Too, other than we saw some more cases and everything. But we didn't see a lot of watering down. We saw a little bit of watering down. I shouldn't say. I mean, we did see some in New York, but we didn't see like nationwide this whole like watering down of the standard to make it unlawful harassment. The standard is still very high. So that hasn't, like, the world for Me Too, post Me Too has not turned upside down. But what some lower hanging fruit is that some states have adopted they've prohibited non-disclosure agreements. And this is a big thing, and a lot of this came out of the Harvey Weinstein litigation, and then also some of the Fox News claims of like all the Fox News harassment that was going on. And a lot of it, you don't hear a lot about it other than the huge amount of money and the people that got fired from Fox News. But you don't hear a lot about it because so many of these, like all these people signed employment agreements that had mandatory arbitration provisions and non-disclosure agreements. And so those are contractual. So several states have said, okay, fine, even if we can't change the standard that we're going to look at for like what is harassment, unlawful harassment, and what is an unlawful hostile work environment, even if we can't get the standard lowered to help out to make it easier to get the employers liable, we can at least get rid of these non-disclosure agreements. So several states, you can see them listed, are prohibiting non-disclosure agreements that prohibit employers from stopping employees from talking about harassment. And if you set, the IRS has had this in place where you don't get to deduct fees, for harassment settlements. So that's, been out there for a couple of years ever since the Trump tax revisions. So we've got that, and the prohibition on non-disclosure agreements. So you definitely need to, pay attention to that before we switch to Canvas. The other thing is arbitration agreements. So some states are looking at prohibiting employers from mandating arbitration agreements, that employees enter into mandatory arbitration agreements and that they arbitrate. And at least some states are looking at carving out arbitration for harassment. And again, this is all the Fox News stuff, right? So all these mandatory arbitration agreements that Fox News had, it stopped people from being able to go to courts where they could probably get a better outcome and all that. So watch that, because especially, that's the big thing that's coming out of Me Too is the change in mandatory arbitration agreements and mandatory non-disclosure agreements. We have had some movement in 2019. I think this is going to continue in 2020 with the proliferation of marijuana. I don't know if anybody knows what marijuana is on this call, but it's a weed, and if you smoke it, it has some effects on you. There's also a medical use for it. It's called medical cannabis. I'm totally being tongue-in-cheek on this. So anyway, medical cannabis is the bigger thing. That was kind of the first go at it. And then we switched over to recreational marijuana. A number of states are moving into recreational marijuana. What we need to know, Illinois was the most recent one. The most recent one on this to Illinois decriminalized marijuana. That was, I think, the big thing that Illinois did, decriminalizing marijuana up to a certain amount. Not that you can have like a pound on you or anything, but you can have some small amount. I don't remember what it is, but of marijuana on you before it's a criminal offense. So pretty easy to bypass that in Illinois. A number of states are also in line in 2020. We want to take a look at this either for medical cannabis or recreational marijuana. Now, what you need to know about this, I mean, it's all great to know like where we can go smoke and buy marijuana for free, or not for free, for without violating state law anyway. Still a violation of federal law. What we need to know though is that it's still okay to test people for marijuana, just like it's okay to do drug testing for people on alcohol. Alcohol is pretty much legal in most places in the United States. I know there are some dry counties out there in the South. But for the most part, it's legal, right? And we've still been able to do drug and alcohol testing. It's the same everywhere in the United States. Now, there are some states, and I've done drug testing, and if you didn't listen, if you're curious on this and you need to know more about drug testing, I did a whole webinar on this a few months ago, and you can get it on our website at www.myhrgenius.co. And you can learn all about drug testing and in the world of recreational marijuana being legal. The point is, you can still do it. Should you look at your drug test, your drug testing policies? Absolutely. You might need to tweak them a little bit here and there in Illinois and some of these other states, particularly because not as much with the recreational marijuana states, but with regard to the medical cannabis, a lot of these states have passed rules with their medical cannabis saying that basically you can't hold somebody, like unless they're impaired by the medical cannabis, you can't hold the drug test against them. So that is something we just want to make sure we if you're doing drug tests, and like Oklahoma, for example, has that rule. Like if Minnesota has that rule as well. If the person tests and they're on the state medical cannabis program, you can't hold it against them. But if they're impaired, then that's different. I mean, if they're, and also it doesn't mean that they can have it at work either. So just because marijuana is legal doesn't mean that you have to allow it on your property. Just because the person's on a medical cannabis program, most states say that you can still restrict them from taking it during work, like ingesting it during work or being impaired during work. So anyway, there's just some nuances to this. This whole marijuana thing seems like the cat's out of the bag. So I think your train's left the station on this. We definitely need to rethink drug testing and look at our policies and everything. But recreational marijuana is just going to become a bigger deal. More states are going to almost certainly pass this in the next, if not 2020, then 2021. Okay, just more of what I said and a nice picture of what I believe is marijuana. Okay. Restrictions on employees. Okay, I already said this. I guess I forgot that I had a slide on it. So non-competes under fire. So here are the states. Some of these are newer in 2019. And again, this is going to be something that I think we need to watch. So non-competes, I mentioned at least on the arbitration side, but some non-competes exactly. And when I say non-competes, I mean not competing, not a non-solicitation agreement, right? So non-compete is saying that you cannot work for another employer in our industry within within a certain geographic radius of where you worked or one of our facilities. Okay, that's a non-compete. Stopping the person from working for a class of jobs with certain employers for a limited period of time, normally a year, sometimes 18 months, sometimes 2 years, maybe even 6 months, after they're done working for you. Okay, that's a non-compete. When I say non-compete, that's what I mean. If I say non-solicit, non-solicit means it's a prohibition on soliciting clients or customers when they leave your employment. Okay, most states aren't touching that. So non-solicits are still on like fair game. But non-competes are different. And so California just passed another law that it's like their third attempt at it, and it just went into effect on January 1. Massachusetts is limiting. So non-competes, California's is much broader, but a lot of these other states like Illinois and Massachusetts are only saying, hey, and I don't mean to exclude Rhode Island, Maryland, Maine, but just, bigger states here that we've, got it probably on the call. Massachusetts, Illinois are saying, hey, yeah, you can't have non-competes, but you can't have non-competes for like lower wage workers. So people who are making up to a certain amount that are non-exempt employees, like no non-competes for them, right? No non-competes for your customer service reps. No non-competes in a professional environment. No non-competes for your blue collar machine operators. Okay, that's Massachusetts. That's Illinois. So there's limits. It's not just like, can you still have a non-compete in some of these states for your executives? Yes. Again, they have to be narrowly written and all that sort of thing. Courts still don't like them, but can you, is it a 100% prohibition across the board? No. California is trying to do pretty much as far as you can go, and even they keep running into problems in enforcing their non-competes. But California is pretty much across the board. Other states are really looking at lower wage workers, prohibiting them. There's no federal law, but interestingly, the FTC in 2019, in later 2019, just started investigating this to see if there's any way that the federal government, through administrative agency, FTC, can limit non-compete agreements nationally. So pay attention, because that would be like a big deal. I mentioned the arbitration agreements. Again, California just January 1 is trying to ban arbitration agreements. This is, like I said, their third crack at it. And in California, if this takes hold, it's criminalized. So if you put a mandatory arbitration agreement into an employment agreement, it's like a criminal offense as of like 2 weeks ago in California. A lot of states, and you can see the list down on harassment claims. So a lot of states are trying to ban, like I had mentioned before, trying to ban these mandatory arbitration agreements. But so no more arbitration agreements on harassment claims. Okay, right? So this is again part of the Me Too thing. But for the most part, the federal judges step in and say those state laws aren't enforceable. So New York was the one that was the first kind of to do it on a big scale, and a federal judge, very quickly was like, I don't think so. We've got a federal law called the FAA that basically says arbitration agreements are a good thing. They're part of contract. This is, you can go read the FAA if you want, but it's been used for decades now to preempt these state bans on arbitration agreements. We see it often also in a labor union context, and the FAA almost always wins out. So New York passed a ban. It was great for politics, but then a federal judge just immediately came in, slapped it away, and said, well, good, you've got a law in New York. It's ineffective. Pay attention to that. If some judges start to say that the FAA doesn't preempt these state laws, I think you're going to see a lot of states starting to ban mandatory arbitration agreement for harassment claims, because I think it's politically good for a lot of politicians. But again, federal law steps in and doesn't make them enforceable. Next month, we are going to have an entire webinar on H-1B and green card process. But if you are thinking about, if you have employees who are on OPT or F1 and they're grads, and you need to get an H-1B for them, or you like them and you want them to continue to work, there is a new system in place this year, brand new for 2020 for H-1Bs, and you should contact me or another attorney to start up the process. So there's going to be a lottery, a registration lottery starting March 1. It's going to go to the 20th. And you basically, if you want an H-1B for a new H-1B in 2020, you better be part of that lottery. And there's a very minor registration fee for it. But rather than putting together the entire application, like we've always historically done, and submitting it on April 1 and then just crossing our fingers, now we get to actually just basically submit our, shot at the lottery from March 1st to March 20th. And we'll see if we get, and then you'll see if you get selected. So we're going to have a whole webinar on this next month on immigration and H-1Bs and green cards and all that. So, but if you have any questions about starting this process and what it looks like, definitely reach out to me in the meantime. And that's it. This is a really good way to start 2020. Like I actually ended on time, so that's a good positive way. Thank you for your attention. Here's the next webinar, the H-1Bs. I appreciate it. If you have any questions, definitely reach out to me at kmosher, M-O-S-H-E-R, @thompsonco.com with any questions. If you have any other questions, or my phone number is 651-389-5007. Thanks for participating with me in this first webinar for 2020. And I hope you enjoyed. Thanks.